Adapted from archaic translation by H.T. Francis and Ra. Neil. Jataka number 314. Lohakumbhi Jataka. Due share of wealth, etc. This story the master, while living at Jetavana monastery, told concerning a king of Kosala. The king of Kosala of those days, they say, one night heard a cry uttered by 4 inhabitants of hell, the syllables do, sa, na, so, one from each of the 4. In a previous existence, tradition says, they had been princes in Shravasti city, and had been guilty of adultery. After sexually misconducting themselves with their neighbors' wives. However carefully guarded they might be, and indulging their amorous propensities, their evil life had been cut short by the wheel of death, near Shravasti city. They came to life again in 4 iron cauldrons. After being tortured for 60,000 years they had come up to the top, and on seeing the edge of the cauldron's mouth they thought to themselves, when shall we escape from this misery? And then all 4 uttered a loud cry, one after another. The king was terrified to death at the noise, and sat waiting for break of day, unable to stir. At dawn the Brahmins came and inquired after his health. The king replied, "How, my masters, can I be well, who today have heard 4 such terrible cries?" The Brahmins waved their hands. "What is it, my masters?" said the king. The Brahmins assure him that the sounds are ominous of great violence. "Do they admit of remedy, or not?" said the king. "You might say not," said the Brahmins, "but we are well trained in these matters, sire." "By what means," said the king, "will you stop these evils?" "Sire," they replied, "there is one great remedy in our power, and by offering the 4 times sacrifice of every living creature we will stop all evil." "Then be quick," said the king, "and take all living creatures by force, men, bulls, horses, elephants, down to quails and other birds, and by this 4 times sacrifice restore my peace of mind." The Brahmins consented, and taking whatever they required, they dug a sacrificial pit and fastened their numerous victims to their stakes, and were highly excited at the thought of the choice foods they were to eat, and the wealth they would gain, and went about backwards and forwards, saying, "Sir, I must have so and so." The Queen Malika came and asked the king, why the Brahmins went about so delighted and smiling. The king said, "My queen, what have you to do with this? You are intoxicated with your own glory, and you do not know how wretched I am." "How so, sire?" she replied. "I have heard such awful noises, my queen. And when I asked the Brahmins what would be the result of my hearing these cries, they told me I was threatened with danger to my kingdom or my property or my life. But by offering the 4 times sacrifice they would restore my peace of mind, and now in obedience to my command, they have dug a sacrificial pit and are gone to fetch whatever victims they require." The queen said, "Have you, my lord, consulted the chief Brahmin in the Deva world as to the origin of these cries?" "Who, lady," said the king, "is the chief Brahmin in the Deva world?" "The great Gautam," she replied, "the supreme Buddha." "Lady," he said, "I have not consulted the supreme Buddha." "Then go," she answered, "and consult him." The king listened to the words of the queen, and after his morning meal he mounted his state chariot and drove to Jetavana monastery. Here after saluting the master he thus addressed him. "Reverend sir, in the night season one heard 4 cries and consulted the Brahmins about it. They undertook to restore my peace of mind, by the 4 times sacrifice of every kind of victim, and are now busy preparing a sacrificial pit. What does the hearing of these cries betoken to me?" "Nothing whatever," said the master. "Certain beings in hell, owing to the agony they suffer, cried aloud. These cries," he added, "have not been heard by you alone. Kings of old heard the same. And when they too, after consulting their Brahmins, were anxious to offer sacrifices of killed victims, on hearing what wise men had to say, they refused to do so. The wise men explained to them the nature of these cries, and asked him to let loose the crowd of victims, and thus restored their peace of mind. And at the request of the king he told a story of past days. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the Bodhisattva was born in a Brahmin family, in a certain village of Kasi. And when he was of mature years, renouncing the pleasures of sense and embracing the ascetic life, he developed the supernatural powers of mystic meditation. And enjoying the delights of contemplation, took up his dwelling in a pleasant grove in the Himalaya country. The king of Benares at this time was fearfully alarmed by hearing those four sounds uttered by four beings who lived in hell. And when told by Brahmins in exactly the same way that one of three dangers must happen to him, he agreed to their proposal to put a stop to it by the 4 times sacrifice. The family priest with the help of the Brahmins provided a sacrificial pit, and a great crowd of victims was brought up and fastened to the stakes. Then the Bodhisattva, guided by a feeling of charity, regarding the world with his divine eye, when he saw what was going on, said, "I must go at once and see to the well-being of all these creatures." And then by his magic power flying up into the air, he descended in the garden of the king of Benares, and sat down on the royal slab of stone, looking like an image of gold. The chief disciple of the family priest approached his teacher and asked, "Is it not written, Master, in our Vedas that there is no happiness for those who take the life of any creature?" The priest replied, "You are to bring here the king's property, and we shall have abundant choice foods to eat. Only hold your peace." And with these words he drove his pupil away. But the youth thought, "I will have no part in this matter," and went and found the Bodhisattva in the king's garden. After saluting him in a friendly manner, he took a seat at a respectful distance. The Bodhisattva asked him, saying, "Young man, does the king rule his kingdom righteously?" "Yes, reverend sir, he does," answered the youth. "But he has heard 4 cries in the night, and on inquiring of the Brahmins, he has been assured by them that they would restore his peace of mind, by offering up the 4 times sacrifice. So the king, being anxious to recover his happiness, is preparing a sacrifice of animals, and a vast number of victims has been brought up and fastened to the sacrificial stakes. Now is it not right for holy men like yourself to explain the cause of these noises, and to rescue these numerous victims from the jaws of death?" "Young man," he replied, "the king does not know us, nor do we know the king, but we do know the origin of these cries, and if the king were to come and ask us the cause, we would resolve his doubts for him." "Then," said the youth, "just stay here a moment, reverend sir, and I will conduct the king to you." The Bodhisattva agreed, and the youth went and told the king all about it, and brought him back with him. The king saluted the Bodhisattva and sitting on one side asked him if it were true that he knew the origin of these noises. "Yes, your majesty," he said. "Then tell me, reverend sir." "Sire," he answered, "these men in a former existence were guilty of bad misconduct with the carefully guarded wives of their neighbors near Benares, and therefore were reborn in 4 iron cauldrons, where after being tortured for 30,000 years in a thick corrosive liquid heated to boiling point, they would at one time sink till they struck the bottom of the cauldron, and at another time rise to the top like a foam bubble. But after those years they found the mouth of the cauldron, and looking over the edge they all 4 desired to give utterance to 4 complete stanzas, but failed to do so. And after getting out just 1 syllable each, they sank again in the iron cauldrons. Now the one of them that sank after uttering the syllable do was anxious to speak as follows: Due share of wealth we gave not. An evil life we led. We found no sure salvation in joys that now are fled. And when he failed to utter it, the Bodhisattva of his own knowledge repeated the complete stanza. And similarly with the rest. The one that uttered merely the syllable sa wanted to repeat the following stanza. Sad fate of those that suffer. Ah! When shall come release? Still after countless eons, hell's tortures never cease. And again in the case of the one that uttered the syllable Na, this was the stanza he wished to repeat. No, endless are the sufferings to which we're doomed by fate. The ills we brought upon the earth it is ours to redress. And the one that uttered the syllable so was anxious to repeat the following. Soon shall I passing on from hence, attain to human birth, and richly gifted with virtue rise to many a deed of worth. The Bodhisattva, after reciting these verses one by one, said, the dweller in hell, sire, when he wanted to utter a complete stanza, through the greatness of his sin, was unable to do it. And when he thus experienced the result of his wrongdoing he cried aloud. But fear not. No danger shall come near you, in consequence of hearing this cry. Thus did he reassure the king. And the king proclaimed by beat of his golden drum that the vast lot of victims was to be released, and the sacrificial pit destroyed. And the Bodhisattva, after thus providing for the safety of the numerous victims, stayed there a few days, and then returning to the same place, without any break in his ecstasy, was born in the world of Brahma. The master, having ended his lesson, identified the birth. Sariputra at that time was the young priest, I myself was the ascetic. Source. Adapted from archaic translation by H.T. Francis and Ra. Neil. Jataka number 315. Maṁsa Jataka. For one who is asking, etc. This was a story told by the master, while living at Jetavana monastery, as to how the elder monk Sariputra procured elegant food for some sick brothers under medical treatment. The story goes that certain of the brethren at that time at Jetavana monastery, after taking oil as a purgative, wished for some elegant food. Those who served to them in their sickness went into Shravasti city to fetch some choice foods. But after going their round for alms in a street in the cook's quarters, had to come back without getting what they wanted. Later on in the day the elder monk was going into the town for alms and meeting these brethren asked them why they had returned so soon. They told him what had happened. Come then with me, said the elder monk, and took them to the very same street. And the people there gave him a full measure of elegant food. The attendants brought the food to the sick brethren, and they ate of it. So one day a discussion was started in the Hall of Truth how that when some servants were leaving a town, without being able to get elegant food for their sick masters, the elder monk took them with him on his round for alms in a street in the cook's quarters, and sent them home with abundant choice foods. The master came up and inquired the nature of the discussion, and on being told what it was he said, not now only, brethren, did Sariputra alone obtain food. Formerly also wise men who had a soft voice and knew how to speak pleasantly obtained the same. And then he told a tale of the olden time. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta reigned in Benares, the Bodhisattva was born as the son of a wealthy merchant. Now one day a certain deer stalker had taken venison, and filling his cart with the meat, returned to the city with the intention of selling it. At this time 4 sons of rich merchants who were living in Benares swiftly moved out of the city. And meeting at some crossroads they sat down and talked with one another about whatever they had seen or heard. One of these youths on seeing the cart full of meat proposed to go and get a piece of venison from the hunter. The others asked him to go and try. So he went up to the hunter, and said, "Hi, Sirrah, give me a piece of meat." The hunter replied, "A man who begs somewhat from another should speak with a gentle voice. You shall receive a piece of meat appropriate to your manner of speech." Then he uttered the first stanza. For one who is asking a favor, my friend, your language is coarse in its tone, such language deserves coarse treatment in return, so I offer you mere skin and bone. Then one of his companions asked him what language he had used in begging for a piece of meat. I said, "Hi, sir." He replied, "I too," said the other, "will beg of him." Then he went to the hunter and said, "O elder brother, give me a piece of venison." The hunter answered, "You shall receive such a piece as the words you have spoken deserve," and he repeated the second stanza. The name of a brother, a strong link is found, to join those similar to each other, as your kind words suggest the gift I should make, so a piece I present to my brother. And with these words he took up and threw him a piece of venison. Then a third youth inquired with what words the last had begged for the meat. "I addressed him as brother," he replied. "Then I too will beg of him," he said. So he went to the hunter and cried, "Dear father, give me a piece of venison." The hunter replied, "You shall receive a piece suitable to the words you have spoken," and he repeated the third stanza. As a parent's fond heart to pity is moved, the cry of dear father to hear, so I too respond to your loving appeal, and give you the heart of the deer. And with these words he picked up and gave him a tasty piece of meat, heart and all. Then the fourth of the youths asked the third youth, with what words he had asked for the venison. "Oh, I called him dear father," he answered. "Then I too will beg a piece," said the other, and he went to the hunter and said, "My friend, give me a piece of meat." Said the hunter, "According to the words you have spoken, shall you receive." And he repeated the fourth stanza. A world without friends, I venture to think, a wilderness surely must be, in that title of friend all that's dear is implied, so I give all the dear unto you. Moreover he said, "Come, friend, I will convey all this cartful of meat to your house." So this merchant's son had the cart driven to his house, and he went and unloaded the meat. And he treated the hunter with great hospitality and respect, and sending for his wife and son he took him away from his cruel occupation, and settled him on his own estate. And they became inseparable friends, and all their life long lived amicably together. The master, having ended his lesson, identified the birth. At that time Saraputra was the hunter, and I myself was the merchant's son who had all the venison given to him.